Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Walt Whitcomb, the Commissioner of the Department of Ag, Conservation, and Forestry, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity today to introduce the members of these two committees to a very broad, wide-ranging, and important proposal that's a part of the budget package that you have and will be working on for many months. My understanding that the nature of your inquiry for me today is to touch upon three key areas. We've got quite a bit of paper, and certainly some will take more time than other pieces of it, but your questions, as I understood from last week, were that you wanted a broad overview of the agency's structure as we took three agencies essentially and developed one, particularly for those members who weren't here during that process over the last 3 years. We wanted a limited outline of our budget initiatives, and then more specifically, you wanted a summary of the position changes that are a part of that budget process. So I'll attempt to touch upon those today, or brief, or in as much depth as you want. We certainly will, for both committees, be back soon to talk about line by line what the initiatives are, and look forward to that opportunity. Just as an overview, the budget has, from our agency, a proposal that includes 139 separate initiatives. And again, you will be studying those, and 12 of those have language pieces as a component of that. There are several modifications to our existing structure, and quite a few, frankly, housekeeping, what we think of, and I hope you do too, think of as housekeeping kinds of alternatives to, or alterations to what exists in the budget process. We believe that these are pieces within the budget that reflect an agency that's beginning to kind of hit stride, that's beginning to understand its potential to move toward maximizing our ability to partner with the many people, businesses and individuals and interest groups that have a tremendous interest in our natural resources. And I really believe that to understand the whole of what we have, it's easier to do in the context of the entire budget proposal, but today we'll take some snapshots of what we're doing and perhaps prepare ourselves through your questions for a more in-depth presentation down the road. So the pieces of material that you have in front of you in response to the questions, and I don't know how, Mr. Chairman and the chairs, you want this to proceed. I welcome questions at any time, or if you want me to work a while and then respond, that's however you wish.
Well, I suppose you got to get something out there.
Explain what it is, particularly those who listen.
Right, and I don't think there'd be a problem coming in occasionally.
And I have no problem with that at all.
Yeah, that would keep it.
So I can, in three broad areas, I can talk about the structure of the agency in the past and where we are right now, and then a little bit about the envisioned structure. And maybe that's a point where we can take questions if they exist, and then delve into the positions, which I know are of intense interest to a lot of folks. So you have before you a document that really was our first move when we combined agriculture, the remnants of the Department of Conservation and remnants of SBO, that shows, I guess probably to show you where I'm looking, the initiative that shows 7 different divisions within the newly configured department. That's where this discussion began. We looked at what we thought were the breakdowns of the various divisions in the existing agencies, and those of you who were there at the time and on various committees remember that we did this trying to do as few changes internally as possible in order to combine these agencies. So that's where we were. That was the question asked. The next item that you have in front of you shows the agency as presently as it exists, and that is with 4 bureaus. And frankly, this was an initiative on the part of various interest groups that came to the legislature and said, look, we don't think that structure that I first accurately reflects the size of this agency and the various responsibilities that it has dealing with natural resources. And so they suggested, and the legislature ultimately adopted, an agency with 4 bureaus. Essentially agriculture as it existed before with all its components instead of divisions broken out. A Bureau of Parks and Lands, a Bureau of Forestry, and then a Bureau of what was eventually named Resource Information Land Use Planning, which was components of geology and many components of the SBO office. Coastal planning, municipal planning, what's now Land Use Planning Commission, Land for Maine Future, and some of the further materials has those all listed. So this is where we are today in terms of structure. The next 2 pieces of paper that I have, and I'm sorry I actually don't have the numbers for you, show 3 bureaus under the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, which is essentially the budget proposal. It is a Bureau of Agriculture, a Bureau of Conservation, and a Bureau of Forestry. We think that allows us to better focus our resources within 3 bureaus. If you are all looking at the same piece of paper, the next piece is kind of the a little more quiet with no bright colors on it, is a further breakdown, particularly of the forest resources. But the first piece that shows the 3 bureaus, agriculture is about the same as it exists now. In fact, it's exactly the same. The Bureau of Conservation, which I assume would be of interest to these committees, takes parks and all the components of the Bureau of Land Use Planning that had existed and combines it into one, what we think is a more resource helpful bureau. We do not change the components of any of the programs by creating that within those 2 groups, parks, and it includes all of off-road vehicle programs, submerged lands, boating. You see the list on the piece of paper you have. Land Use Planning Commission, Stormwater Conservation Activities. Everything that had previously existed is under the Bureau of Land Use Planning and Information and Parks is in now a Bureau of Conservation. The Bureau of Conservation, I think, really perhaps recreates in mind to some a focus on those land use recreational interests that many of folks are interested in the public. The Agriculture Bureau in this budget shows some increase in activity, and we'll talk about that in more detail. That's of less, I would assume, controversy. We show actually some increased support in the veterinary service and some increased food safety initiatives. The bigger changes in the Bureau of Forestry. So the second piece of paper you have, which is blank, which shows a breakdown of the Bureau of Forestry, explains what we have in mind. I think there are 2 key components to what we're trying to do. We want, and it's now in the arena of public discussion because we're very pleased to offer this to you for a thought process. We are trying very hard to configure this agency to do an even better job of focusing on the broad range of threats to our forestry. By far our largest natural resource component of this state. Right off the bat, our budget separates, and a lot of those position changes you see reflect that. The firefighting component of forestry and all of it. We want to create a clear division of duties there. Over time, we've had to do that for the forest excise tax component, and some of you are very, very familiar with that. We want it to be right up front. This is what the budget does. And we want that to be part of the discussion. We think it's a very important step to take. But within the rest of forestry, we create further separations that are an important step as well. The firefighting that is critically important to this state is going to have a different look if this budget goes through, near the design that we have created. We are providing additional resources to local efforts. I know you've heard that before, all of you, but we'll show you where we've done that. We are separating through this proposal the firefighting duties of our rangers and then creating a new component, which be a separate law enforcement unit with additional resources. That is a fundamental shift in the process of separation of duties. And we're adding to the effort to take care of the forest beyond the firefighting capability. We have a number of additional positions that we've created in this budget that look to do an even better job. We already are very outstanding in access federal support for local coordinated efforts. We increased support for town fire wardens as one example, because we are already very much integrated with local efforts. But we have a number of budget initiatives that address that shift of effort. If you look at the way the world has turned, we fight fires, the big fires with helicopters. We have resources, as we have for some years, to improve that capability. But we also want to reorganize the effort of our ground forces to make sure that they're even more involved in the significant resources we have in the communities, and take advantage of the training that we do across state lines for that major catastrophic event that we're all hoping never happens in this state. This budget addresses very firmly the concern about ranger safety that's brought up again and again. We have already integrated our dispatch services with state police, and some of the resources are going that way instead of having our own. We've created a number of other forestry perspectives. And we have moved public lands under the Bureau of Forestry, so all of the foresters are in one division. So that is the broad overview of the structure. If that's a point where it would be useful to respond to questions before I get into the details of the...
We've got a couple of hands up, so go to Representative Martin first.
Thank you very much. Winter Commissioner, if you could prepare a chart, let's start with the Division of Forest Fire Control. What are the number of positions that are authorized now?
That was me.
And how many of those are filled, how many are unfilled under the present law? And then the chart which would reflect what will be, based on this reorganization, how many people would remain in forest fire control under that structure.
Okay.
And what would be the new structure that would evolve? Because obviously, if you decrease the number, there'll have to be reallocation statewide, and where would the positions be under that reorganization? And then finally, when we talk about the natural resources enforcement officers, how many are being proposed, and where would they be located, and what would be the jurisdictional sections that could, so we can see a, before and after, I guess. And I know that you've got that, yeah, it's on that sheet that we got, but I'm talking about on a map. Yeah.
We will address a little bit of that as we go down to these positions in an overview, as you had asked for. Some of those staffing changes will all be determined when the legislature is finally done. I can talk about the vision, and the staff is already working on how it might look. Clearly, the intent is for statewide coverage. Clearly, the preliminary notices that folks got appear to be more one than another. We did not do that list. That was strictly done by through the HR process. So obviously, coverage has to be the clear final product. But we'll take notes, and we'll be back with it.
I'm assuming that is it 13 that got the letter?
The preliminary letter is.
I'm assuming that's under the assumption the proposed plan as presented would go into effect.
That's correct. That's part of the plan.
And so, in addition to those 13, I'm sure there must be some of those positions out there that are not filled at the moment. Unfilled positions in
Correct. And I can show you those on the listing in terms of numbers of vacant positions.
Okay, if
We
you just-
already have.
easier for you, if it were in a, this is what it's gonna be statewide, this is what it is now, if this happens, what would be, how would it look?
We'll bring those kinds of things back or forward to you folks, and frankly, suggestion might be it could be incorporated in the budget presentation when we're back here. Agents to have a pretty fast.
I don't have that today or next week, I mean, just when we finally do
And I'll-
the breakup.
And if I can, when I get to those, talking to those positions in the big picture overview in a few minutes, it'll address some of that. Other questions about structure?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. I really appreciate the visual charts that helps to picture for someone who's new to these department reorganizations. It's very helpful. Could you, in keeping with the broad overview, could you give us a sense of what were the big issues that drove or are driving this kind of reorganization? What kinds of issues have come up that have not been able to be addressed, or resources that you think have not been as well utilized? And clearly there's been a lot of thinking, a lot of background going into this. Could you just give us a snapshot about really what's driving the changes that you're proposing?
Well, if we're talking a lot about forestry, and I think we might as well boil it down to that, there's a great deal of concern in the industry about pending threats to the forest. We know this spruce rebuttal is going to happen to us to some degree relatively soon. It'll be handled far differently than it was decades ago, but it still will be here, and the forest is a different place than it was then. We have, this administration has, even before it became a consolidated agency, really tried to focus on the management of that, working with the many interests, including our own public lands interests, of how we consolidate our resources, look at the health of the forest. And so there's a seismic change in terms of having it be more than firefighting. And I think that's the big public policy question that is now in your hands, is where do we go with those resources? And we're very, very cognizant of what a shift like this does to the people, to the whole thought process, and frankly to the delivery of services to the public. And there's kind of a feeling in the industry that we can do more with what we have. We're clearly trying to separate fire from other things. I mean, that's obviously the whole breakout of the forest. But even beyond that, how do we address those threats? And we say spruce bucking because it's in the memory of many of us, but still, there are many other threats to the forest that are of an invasive. Spruce bucking is invasive because it's endemic. It just shows up confused. That we see coming. We've got something like emerald ash borer, which is in the state next door, that affect a component of the forest. When it scares us a lot as we try to grow the maple industry, it can be devastating to maple. We don't have the forces to stand up and keep the bugs from coming, so to speak, but we do want to move our resources, human resources, more in that direction. So you'll see some of the additional positions that we've created in the budget to help look at those resources. There was the intense discussion over the last 2 years, and there's been here for decades, about the safety of our ranger workforce, the so-called arming the rangers question. And we've presented what we believe as a compromise proposal, if you believe there should be arming, is that you create a force like every other state that does this. Most states do not arm rangers at all. But the dozen, 15 that do, create a separate force, highly trained, specific responsibilities, law enforcement responsibilities, separated from our other traditional ranger duties. It's a mixture now. Yes, they're in the law enforcement grouping, but they're not allowed to do certain things. So we tackled that debate right up front. this is what the proposal is. It takes more resources for those people. That's why we essentially had the budget, looking the way it does. We want them to be trained. If they're going to do it, we want them trained. And then I think it's going to be more difficult than I can do before I get back to you the next time to talk about all the separation of duties, because there's dozens of separations that have to occur. Our budget proposal should be effective July 1st. Builds financially into that a whole timeless period for all of our people. The preliminary notice that folks got, which we were required to do, and we had a lot of them that went out, does not account for the fact that if you decide to follow the path that we've set forward, we have the ability to pay people budget-wise right until next December 30th. We have the capacity with some of the bigger positions that the representative from Eagle Lake brought to your attention, to actually be filling positions, creating positions and filling them while people are in place. We don't have to empty a position before we can create a new one for the law enforcement grouping. We think that's important. To make a change as significant as this, we have done our best to have it happen as the process goes in a way that reflects obviously the needs of our staff. For a year, for that grouping of people, we've not proposed a change. Obviously, there are many pieces that have to be worked out in terms of the separation of responsibilities. We've looked at other states. We were involved in task force 2 years ago. We developed some material for that. So, long answer, but I think it's a very significant question about why did you do this? We felt we could do on the other part, the agriculture stays essentially the same with some improvements. That the conservation one is just a better way to do business here. The land managers that work on recreation and so forth, the coastal soil programs that came from SBO and so forth, and one focus grouping. So, with the glaring deficiencies, no, but looking ahead, we think we can align people to better address the problems that face us every day.
Senator Valentino.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Commissioner. I have a few questions on the reorganization itself. Now, originally, when I first started here, we had a separate Department of Agriculture. We had a separate department for conservation and the consolidation that happened on that. So we went into the consolidation. We had 7 different bureaus. Then we went down to 4, and now we're going down to 3. And in this, under one of the parts of the budget too, you're renaming 11 different programs under it. I'm just wondering the costs, the overall cost savings on this reorganizing is a wonderful thing if you're actually saving money. But if you're just eliminating these positions that would have been eliminated under the old structure, why go through the reorganization process? So what I'm trying to get my head around is what are we actually saving for money for the reorganization versus just eliminating positions in this reorganization. So that's, I guess, the number one thing, because we are taking under Part Y, it has the combination of things under the Bureau of Conservation that you're now creating. So we had a separate Department of Conservation, now we're having a Bureau of Conservation.
Right.
So that's my overview, and then I have one other question on Rangers applications. Thank you.
Was that I expect an answer right now question?
Well, I just, not a long answer, maybe a comment. I'm trying to just separate what you're actually saying. Having served on this committee before, one of my pet peeves was always, let's rename something.
Right.
Like, is there a purpose for it? I'm trying to get a handle of the cost savings and the purpose of renaming and reorganizing. If the majority of the savings are just in elimination of positions where that could be done. So I'm trying to find out what is we actually saving by reorganizing this.
Well, one of the hallmarks, and I really felt one of the reasons after many years of discussion we were able to put this agency together those 3 years that this administration came to the various interest groups and said, look, we're not doing this to save $500,000. We're doing this to put resources that work well together, and then reconfigure the same dollars to provide improved services to their constituencies. So the dollar savings would be, I guess, a different component that I would have to pull together in the budget process. And the other thing that I would like to see is, and maybe the renaming of 11 positions is a bit of a mystery to me. I mean, I can show you some that are renamed as a result of the reorganization. I'd want to get back to you on exactly the decisions on each one of those. I'll talk to a few of them, and some of them you may be describing renaming. Actually, we've created a few positions. So that I wonder if you would share with me a specific answer. Perhaps I can, rather than sort of winging it up here, so to speak. If I could get back to you with those answers, that would perhaps be better use of all of our time.
That was
there are-
part GG, just
Okay.
as a reference, part G, they were all renamed. So that's fine, get back to me, that's all.
And that part B of your question says?
Okay, so your specific reference is GG. And I think probably we would have to explain why we did each one of those. We don't just sit there and think, well, I'll give it a new name. I mean, there's a reason some of them detail with different responsibilities. In the case of the resource planning group, this position that, reverted to an old position. Living as best we could, we did not, other than the sea shift in the ranger activity, for a major shift, there's a lot of wholeness in this budget, not wholesale letting go or oppose that. And there's a couple of them that are actually a question we're putting to the body about. We have a number of appointed positions that we think that's not appropriate. It's difficult for any administration to say that, but they perhaps should become civil service positions. We're putting that before you, and so that would be, there's 2 or 3 of those, and that sort of would be a rename that would be gone. Politically appointed bureau heads in the past, but now they're proposing to use that be changed. So that's a type of thing that we did. I mean, as I said, there are a lot of lines to this. There's a great deal of effort. And I'm not saying it's perfect. I mean, nobody would get away with that up here from addressing the legislature. There's a lot of thought behind most of it.
And my other question pertains to Part AA in the budget, where under the Forest Rangers, you strip all law enforcement powers under the Forest Rangers, and then you create a new section on natural resource law enforcement officers. I'm just curious, we have fish and game wardens, we have marine wardens. Would this be equivalent to be like a warden under this? And would they be able to carry firearms? I noticed you had a provision in there that you could get like bulletproof vests and stuff, obviously to protect somebody. But I guess what I'm just wondering, this natural resource law enforcement officer, where does he kind of fall on the scale, where he's being called a law enforcement officer, as in comparison to, say, a warden, and what is his going to be capabilities of actually enforcing the law? Will he have the ability to carry a firearm?
The short answer is yes.
Yes, he will be able to carry a firearm, because I saw no provision in this budget for training or for a provision for purchasing of guns or ammunition. So I was wondering on that because I didn't see either training or an ammunition to put into the budget.
Well, curiously, you'll find in some of the words, if you look carefully, the removal in both those instances of the prohibition that the department is under. The department, as a matter of memory of this, is prohibited from owning and purchasing protective devices. That is, this budget proposal takes that out. This is remove the prohibition. And there's also a component within statute that exempts rangers from having to have full training. That is stricken as well. So this is a very far-reaching proposal. We have money budgeted for full training of those individuals that would be part of the natural resource law enforcement. It's intended that they be trained to the capabilities of the groups that you just described.
And I could not find that in the budget, so if you could maybe next time,
Well, I
tell
wouldn't be
me
the one to point it out to you.
Where-
I'm sitting here, so we will get to those
where that
points.
money is being allocated. I did not see a new initiative for training for carrying firearms. So if you could just get that back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. It is my understanding that the Forest Rangers currently help with emergency management services.
Very well, they do it very, very well, yes.
And so I'm wondering if cutting as many positions are being cut would affect that in any way, and has the department talked to the other providers of these services about what we may be looking like, especially as we look at climate change, disaster floods. Where are we going? Has that been discussed?
I'm assuming you don't want me to get into a discussion on climate change at this point in time. So the base question is, as I understood it, if we're cutting a lot of positions, how are we going to handle whatever situation arises? If you look at our proposal, the number of actual positions cut has a strong resemblance to the number of positions we have back. And we eliminate a number of vacant positions, we have a number of changes to the workforce. Our intent is for our ranger workforce, who are highly considered in terms of their ability to work with local resources for emergency situations, we continue to excel at those kinds of activities that are a training, instructional exercise, not a law enforcement exercise. So we weave away the law enforcement responsibilities to another group, the issuing of subpoenas, those kinds of more active law enforcement activities. In their intent, the law enforcement group is to partner with other law enforcement entities, all of them. There's an anxiousness out of them to have a trained force to help. But we also want that exercise to be clearly separated in a discussion of funding streams, and to have the component of the individuals that are fire ready, fire trained, that work with locals on fire trained, as a separate activity. It's a brand new mindset of what these individuals do, and I don't. And as I said to you, it's very common in other places. They're very, very good at emergency response, at coordinating emergency response, but we don't want them untrained to be the first responders to those law enforcement activities. That's where we want the separation of duties. They're trained not to be the first to go to a domestic situation. Their accident rate is astoundingly low. Their incident rate is astoundingly low, and we want to keep it that way. And we think by separating law enforcement from fire readiness keeps the direction over that.
I think that if we look into more details, we might find that that's not entirely true. But aside from that, the other agencies that supply emergency management services, are they in on this particular reorganization, this cutting of these positions? Or I guess I'm trying to figure out if there has been any talk amongst the agencies that this would be a good idea for emergency management response over the long term or not.
But this discussion is about 3 years old that I've been involved with in terms of the configurations of what we were part of, and I believe you attended one of the meetings a year and a half ago, of a law enforcement task force group that came out with a report and talked about the varying responsibilities, heavily weighed to the law enforcement side. To be perfectly frank, that group wanted to see all of them assisting in law enforcement. And we just, to us, that was the seed for separating firefighting from law enforcement, forest protection from law enforcement. The primary mission of this agency is to protect the forest and the natural resource. We want the budget to reflect that. The law enforcement component, as a part of our duties, is a smaller part of what we do. We just don't think committing all the resources to law enforcement, is the way this budget should be presented. So you see our best shot at separating those components, beginning the process of separating those components.
So Senator Cates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Commissioner, for being here. So it sounds as though, correct me if I'm wrong, this from 30,000 feet, that you're talking about limiting the role of rangers to the protection of the resource, pretty much, particularly in light of the impending things we're facing in the health of the forest. And a couple of things that they've been doing. One is firefighting, and the other is law enforcement. You're shipping out elsewhere. So I just want to ask a couple of questions real quick. First of all, on the firefighting, I think of what I heard you say is that you're going to have fewer rangers, and your attempt is going to be to kind of farm out more of traditional firefighting responsibilities to cooperative efforts with more local efforts. Is that true? Can you expand on that just a bit?
We want to expand about what's happening in the representative was describing that a little bit in the sense that there is a great deal of coordination training going on now. We've just been through an exercise recently. We also partner, and we've created a position to do more of that with drawing in federal material resources in firefighting. There's a lot of that available. We have to track it. We put it out in communities. That's an totally tapped opportunity that we know we need to staff more. And just the way we look at firefighting is different than it was 30 years ago. There's less of the extending our forces out with a backpack to do it. Our people are coordinators now. They work more with the local volunteers and the local resources. They do less of the backpack work and more of the organizing to have a fire-ready resource out there. It's expanding on what's happening right now, and that if we provided additional resources, you will see a budget coordination to help that happen. When you go after a fire with a helicopter, it's a fire different